Dr. Elena Vasquez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she carefully brushed sediment away from what appeared to be another fossilized bone. The dig site in the remote Montana Badlands had yielded more mysteries than answers over the past 6 months. What started as a routine paleontological expedition had turned into something that challenged everything scientists thought they knew about Earth's prehistoric past. The morning sun cast long shadows across the excavation site as Elena's team worked methodically through layers of rock that dated back 65 million years. This was the boundary layer, the geological marker that separated the age of dinosaurs from the age of mammals. According to textbooks, this should have been where they found evidence of the great extinction event that wiped out the giant reptiles and paved the way for smaller creatures to inherit the Earth. Instead, they were finding something impossible. "Dr. Vasquez, you need to see this," called out Marcus Chen, a graduate student who had been working on a particularly promising section of the dig. His voice carried an excitement that made Elena drop her tools and hurry over to where he was crouched. Marcus pointed to a section of exposed rock where several large bones were clearly visible. But these weren't dinosaur bones. Elena knelt down and examined the fossils more closely, her trained eye immediately recognizing what she was looking at. These were the remains of a massive predatory mammal, something that resembled a saber-toothed cat but was easily 3 times larger than any prehistoric feline ever discovered. "The dating is confirmed," Marcus said, consulting his notes. "This layer is definitely from the Cretaceous period, right at the boundary. But look at this." He pointed to scratch marks on a nearby rock formation. "These aren't random geological formations. These are claw marks, and they're fresh relative to the geological timeframe." Elena studied the marks more carefully. Marcus was right. The scratches showed a pattern that suggested a large predator had been sharpening its claws on the rock surface. But what made her blood run cold was the size of the marks. Whatever had made these scratches would have had claws nearly a foot long. "There's more," Marcus continued, leading her to another section of the dig. "We've found remains of at least 7 different species of large predators, all from the same time period. None of them match any known prehistoric creatures, and they all show signs of having lived right up until the extinction event." Elena examined the additional fossils with growing amazement. Here was a creature that looked like a massive wolf with elongated limbs and oversized teeth. Over there, the remains of what appeared to be a giant bear with armor-like bone plating covering its back and shoulders. Each discovery was more impossible than the last. "This doesn't make sense," Elena muttered, more to herself than to Marcus. The fossil record shows that mammals during this period were small, mostly nocturnal creatures that survived by hiding from dinosaurs. There's no way predators of this size could have existed alongside T-Rex and other large theropods. But the evidence was right there in front of her, preserved in stone for 65 million years. As the day wore on, more team members arrived at the dig site, and word of the unusual discoveries began to spread. Dr. James Morrison, the expedition's lead paleontologist and Elena's former mentor, arrived from the base camp with barely contained excitement. "I've been in this field for 30 years, Morrison said as he examined the fossils. "I've never seen anything like this. These creatures would have been apex predators, possibly even more dangerous than the largest dinosaurs of their time." The team worked through the afternoon, carefully documenting each find and taking detailed photographs. As they dug deeper, they uncovered more evidence of these mysterious ancient predators. Fossilized teeth the size of railroad spikes, vertebrae from creatures that must have stood 12 feet tall at the shoulder, and claw fragments that suggested talons capable of rending through even the thickest hide. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery came late in the afternoon when Elena's brush uncovered what appeared to be a primitive carving on a flat piece of stone. The markings were crude but unmistakably deliberate, showing stick figure representations of humans fleeing from large, predatory shapes. "This has to be a coincidence," Morrison said, examining the carved stone. "Humans didn't exist 65 million years ago. The earliest human ancestors we know of appeared millions of years later." Elena stared at the carving, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The figures were clearly meant to represent humans, complete with upright posture and the distinctive shape of human heads. The predators chasing them matched the size and general appearance of the fossilized remains they had been uncovering all day. Maybe we're misreading the geological dating, Marcus suggested. Maybe these layers are younger than we think. Morrison shook his head. I've triple-checked the radiometric dating. These rock layers are definitely from the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary. There's no question about the time frame. As evening approached and the team prepared to return to base camp, Elena noticed something else unusual about the dig site. The concentration of predator fossils seemed to follow a specific pattern, as if the creatures had all died in roughly the same location over a short period of time. More puzzling still, many of the bones showed signs of violence, deep gouges that could have been made by weapons, and evidence of burning that suggested the use of fire. That night in the base camp, the team gathered around a campfire to discuss their findings. The mood was one of excited confusion as each scientist tried to piece together an explanation for what they had discovered. Let's assume for a moment that our dating is correct, Elena said, staring into the flames. We have evidence of large predatory mammals that shouldn't have existed during the age of dinosaurs. We have what appears to be primitive artwork depicting humans fleeing from these creatures. And we have evidence that these predators died violently, possibly from some kind of conflict. You're suggesting that humans existed 65 million years ago, asked Dr. Sarah Kim, the team's anthropologist. That would overturn everything we know about human evolution. Elena shrugged. I'm not suggesting anything yet. I'm just trying to understand what we've found. Morrison leaned back in his chair, looking troubled. There's something else bothering me about this site. In 30 years of paleontological work, I've never seen a dig site where so many different predator species were concentrated in one location. Predators typically have large territories and avoid competing with each other for resources. Unless they were all drawn to the same thing, Marcus said thoughtfully. Some kind of common prey or resource that brought them together. But what could have attracted so many different predators to one location? Sarah asked. Elena stared into the fire, an uncomfortable thought beginning to form in her mind. What if they weren't drawn here by prey? What if they were driven here? What if something was hunting them? The implications of her suggestion hung heavy in the night air. The idea that something could have been powerful enough to hunt creatures that were themselves apex predators seemed almost impossible to contemplate. The next morning brought fresh discoveries that only deepened the mystery. As the team expanded their excavation area, they uncovered what appeared to be the remains of a primitive settlement. Stone tools, fire pits, and what looked like the foundations of simple shelters were found in the same geological layer as the predator fossils. This is impossible, Morrison muttered as he examined a carefully knapped stone blade that was clearly designed for hunting large game. Tools this sophisticated shouldn't have appeared until millions of years later in the archaeological record. Elena picked up one of the stone points and tested its edge. Even after 65 million years, the blade was still sharp enough to cut. The craftsmanship was remarkable, showing a level of skill that rivaled the work of much later Stone Age cultures. Look at the size of these spear points, Sarah observed, holding up what appeared to be the head of a throwing spear. They're designed for bringing down very large prey. Prey the size of the predators we've been finding. As the morning progressed, the team uncovered more evidence of what appeared to be an ancient human settlement. Fire-hardened wooden stakes that might have been part of defensive fortifications, grinding stones for processing food, and even what appeared to be primitive artwork carved into the rock walls of a nearby cliff face. The artwork was particularly fascinating. Unlike the crude stick figures they had found the previous day, these carvings showed a sophisticated understanding of anatomy and proportion. They depicted humans engaged in various activities, hunting, gathering, and what appeared to be complex social interactions. But, most intriguingly, they showed humans successfully hunting the giant predators whose fossils littered the dig site. These aren't just random hunting scenes, Elena realized as she studied the carvings. They're documenting specific hunting techniques. Look here, this shows humans using fire to drive predators into traps. And this one shows coordinated group tactics for bringing down large prey. Marcus joined her at the rock wall, his eyes widening as he took in the scope of the artwork. It's like an instruction manual for hunting prehistoric monsters. The carvings continued for nearly 50 feet along the cliff face, telling a story that seemed to span generations. They showed the evolution of hunting techniques, from simple ambush tactics to complex strategies involving multiple hunters working in coordination. But, perhaps most remarkable were the final panels in the sequence. These showed humans not just hunting the giant predators, but, apparently driving them to extinction through systematic persecution. The last carvings depicted empty landscapes devoid of the massive creatures that had dominated earlier scenes. "My God," Sarah whispered as she studied the final panels. "It's documenting a deliberate campaign of extermination." These ancient humans weren't just defending themselves, they were actively eliminating these predator species. Elena felt a chill run down her spine as the implications became clear. If the artwork was accurate, then, humanity's ancestors hadn't simply survived the age of giant predators, they had been responsible for ending it. That afternoon, as the team continued their excavation, they made their most significant discovery yet. Hidden beneath a collapsed section of what appeared to be an ancient dwelling, they found a sealed clay vessel containing what looked like primitive writing materials. The vessel contained dozens of thin stone tablets covered with intricate markings that bore a striking resemblance to early cuneiform script. But, according to conventional archaeological wisdom, writing systems weren't developed until thousands of years later in human history. Dr. Kim spent hours studying the tablets, trying to decipher the ancient markings. Finally, she called the team together with an expression of barely controlled excitement. "I think I figured out part of what these say," she announced, holding up one of the tablets. The markings are pictographic, similar to early writing systems but much more sophisticated. This tablet appears to be describing hunting procedures for something called the Great Devourers. She pointed to specific symbols on the tablet. "This symbol here appears repeatedly, it seems to represent the giant predators we've been finding. And, these markings describe specific techniques for tracking them, trapping them, and killing them efficiently." Elena leaned in to examine the tablet more closely. "It's like a field guide for prehistoric monster hunting." "But, there's more," Sarah continued, picking up another tablet. "This one appears to be documenting the results of their hunting campaigns. It's keeping track of which predator species they've eliminated and which ones still pose a threat." The tablets painted a picture of an ancient human civilization that was far more advanced than previously believed possible. These weren't primitive hunter-gatherers struggling to survive in a hostile world. These were sophisticated strategists who had identified the greatest threats to their survival and systematically eliminated them. As evening approached, Elena found herself standing alone at the edge of the dig site, trying to process everything they had discovered. The evidence was overwhelming, but it contradicted everything that modern science believed about human evolution and prehistoric life on Earth. If their findings were accurate, then human civilization was millions of years older than anyone had imagined. More troubling still, it suggested that humanity's earliest ancestors had possessed the knowledge and capability to drive entire species to extinction through organized warfare. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted her thoughts. Morrison joined her at the edge of the excavation, looking equally troubled. 30 years in this field," he said quietly, "and I've never seen anything that challenged the fundamentals of what we know about the past. What we're finding here, it's going to change everything." Elena nodded, still staring out at the dig site where ancient bones lay exposed under the dying light of day. "The question is, are we ready for everything to change?" As night fell over the remote Montana Badlands, the team retreated to their base camp to plan their next steps. They had uncovered evidence of an ancient human civilization that had successfully hunted prehistoric monsters to extinction 65 million years ago. But that was only the beginning of the mystery. Hidden among the tablets they had discovered were references to other threats, other creatures that had somehow survived the ancient humans' campaign of extermination. And, according to the cryptic markings on the stone tablets, some of those creatures might still be alive somewhere in the world. The greatest discovery in human history was turning into something much more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. 3 weeks after the initial discoveries, the Montana dig site had been transformed into a major archaeological operation. News of the finds had spread through academic circles, bringing experts from around the world to witness what many were calling the most significant paleontological discovery in human history. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the newly constructed research tent, surrounded by carefully catalogued artifacts that challenged everything scientists thought they knew about human evolution. The stone tablets alone numbered in the hundreds now, each one revealing new details about the ancient civilization that had apparently thrived 65 million years ago. But it was the latest translations that kept Elena awake at night. Dr. Sarah Kim had made remarkable progress in deciphering the ancient pictographic writing system. What had started as simple hunting instructions had evolved into something far more complex and disturbing. The tablets told the story of a war that had lasted for thousands of years, a systematic campaign by early humans to eliminate what they called the old hunters. "The translations are getting clearer," Sarah announced to the assembled team during their morning briefing. "These aren't just hunting records. They're military intelligence reports documenting a coordinated global war against prehistoric predators." She held up a particularly well-preserved tablet covered in intricate markings. This tablet describes something they called the Great Culling. It appears to be a coordinated worldwide campaign that took place over several centuries. Different human settlements across multiple continents were working together to track down and eliminate specific predator species. Dr. Morrison leaned forward in his chair, his weathered face creased with concern. "Global coordination 65 million years ago? That would require a level of civilization and communication that shouldn't have been possible." Sarah nodded grimly. According to these tablets, the ancient humans had developed sophisticated methods of long-distance communication. They used fire signals, trained animals as messengers, and even primitive maps showing migration routes and seasonal patterns of their prey. Elena studied the translated text that Sarah had prepared. The ancient humans hadn't just been defending themselves from predators. They had been actively hunting them down with military precision, using tactics that wouldn't have seemed out of place in a modern warfare manual. "This section here," Sarah continued, pointing to a series of symbols, describes specialized hunting units. Different groups were trained to target specific types of predators. Some specialized in the giant cats, others focused on the armored bear-like creatures we've been finding. Marcus Chen, who had been working on analyzing the fossilized remains, spoke up from across the tent. "That would explain the concentration of different predator species we found at the dig site. It wasn't their natural territory, it was a killing ground." The evidence was mounting that the ancient humans hadn't just been successful in their campaign against the prehistoric predators. They had been devastatingly effective. Species that had dominated the Earth for millions of years had been driven to extinction in what appeared to be a coordinated global extermination campaign. But the tablets also revealed something that made Elena's blood run cold. According to the ancient records, not all of the predators had been eliminated. "There are references here to what they called the deep sleepers," Sarah explained, translating from another tablet. "Creatures that went into hiding in remote places where the humans couldn't reach them. Underground caverns, deep ocean trenches, frozen wastes at the ends of the Earth." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Montana morning air. "You're saying some of these things might still be alive?" Sarah nodded reluctantly. According to these records, the ancient humans were unable to eliminate several species of predators that had adapted to extreme environments. The tablets suggest that these creatures went into some kind of hibernation, waiting for conditions to improve. Dr. Morrison stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the ground. "That's impossible. Nothing could survive in hibernation for 65 million years." "Not under normal circumstances," agreed Marcus. "But some of these species appear to have had extraordinary physiological adaptations. The bone structure we've analyzed suggests metabolisms that could slow down to almost nothing during times of stress or food scarcity." Elena walked over to a table where dozens of fossilized remains had been carefully arranged. The bones told a story of creatures that were unlike anything in the modern world. Predators with redundant organ systems, bones that were denser than modern materials, and muscle attachment points that suggested strength levels that defied belief. "What if they were right?" Elena asked quietly. "What if some of these creatures did survive by going into deep hibernation?" The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. If even a few of the prehistoric predators had survived, hidden away in remote corners of the Earth, they could still pose a threat to modern humanity. And, after 65 million years of hibernation, they would emerge into a world where humans had lost all knowledge of how to fight them. That afternoon, Elena received a phone call that changed everything. Dr. Amanda Foster, a marine biologist from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, had heard about their discoveries through academic networks. She had information that she believed was related to their findings. 6 months ago, our deep-sea exploration team discovered something unusual in the Mariana Trench, Dr. Foster explained over the satellite phone. We found what appeared to be artificial caverns at depths where no known geological processes could have created them. Elena felt her heart rate increase. Artificial how? The caverns showed clear signs of having been deliberately excavated. Tool marks on the walls, organized chamber systems, and, most disturbing of all, evidence of recent biological activity. Elena gripped the phone tighter. What kind of biological activity? We found organic matter that shouldn't have been able to survive at those depths and pressures. More importantly, we found what appeared to be shed scales or skin fragments from something very large. Our carbon dating suggests the biological material is only a few decades old. The implications were staggering. If Dr. Foster was right, then something was alive in the deepest parts of the ocean, something that had been hiding there for an unimaginable length of time. There's more, Dr. Foster continued. We've been monitoring unusual seismic activity in the area where we found the caverns. The patterns don't match any known geological phenomena. They're too regular, too organized. Almost like something very large is moving around down there. Elena shared the information with her team that evening. The mood around the campfire was subdued as the scientists tried to process the growing evidence that their ancient discoveries might have modern implications. If Dr. Foster is right, Morrison said slowly, then, we may be dealing with more than just an archaeological curiosity. We might be looking at an active threat. Sarah had been working through the night to translate more of the ancient tablets, focusing specifically on references to the deep sleepers. What she had discovered was even more troubling than they had feared. According to these records, she announced, the ancient humans believed that the surviving predators would eventually emerge from hibernation when conditions were favorable for their return. What kind of conditions? Elena asked. Sarah consulted her notes. High atmospheric oxygen levels, specific temperature ranges, and, most importantly, a large enough human population to serve as prey. The tablets suggest that these creatures were specifically adapted to hunt humans. Marcus looked up from the fossil he had been examining. That would make sense from an evolutionary standpoint. If these predators had been in an arms race with humans for thousands of years, they would have adapted specifically to hunt human prey. Elena felt sick to her stomach. The ancient tablets weren't just historical records. They were warnings. The prehistoric humans had failed to eliminate all of their enemies, and those enemies were still out there, waiting for the right moment to return. Over the following days, more evidence began to accumulate from around the world. Research teams working in remote locations reported unusual findings that seemed to corroborate the Montana discoveries. A geological survey team in Siberia had discovered flash-frozen remains of giant predators in permafrost layers that shouldn't have been old enough to contain such creatures. The remains showed signs of having been alive much more recently than conventional dating would suggest. An archaeological expedition in the Amazon rainforest had uncovered stone structures that appeared to be ancient defensive fortifications built specifically for protection against very large predators. The structures were far older than any known human civilization in South America, but they showed clear signs of human construction. Most disturbing of all, several research stations in Antarctica had reported unusual seismic activity originating from deep beneath the ice. The patterns were similar to what Dr. Foster's team had detected in the ocean trenches, too regular to be natural geological activity. Elena found herself working late into the night, poring over the ancient tablets with growing concern. The prehistoric humans had left detailed records not just of their successful hunting campaigns, but of their failures as well. They had documented the locations where dangerous predators had escaped elimination, and many of those locations corresponded exactly with the modern reports of unusual activity. The tablets also contained something that chilled Elena to the bone, predictions about what would happen if the surviving predators ever emerged from their hiding places. According to the ancient records, the deep sleepers weren't just ordinary predators. They were the survivors, the most dangerous and intelligent of their species. They had learned from their encounters with human hunters and had adapted their behavior accordingly. When they emerged, they would be prepared for human tactics and technology. They're describing adaptive intelligence, Elena explained to her team during an emergency meeting. These weren't just animals acting on instinct. They were capable of learning, planning, and adapting their hunting strategies based on human behavior. Morrison looked pale. You're suggesting that these creatures were intelligent enough to deliberately go into hiding and wait for a better opportunity to emerge? Elena nodded grimly. According to these tablets, that's exactly what they did. And, now, 65 million years later, the conditions might finally be right for their return. The tablets described specific environmental triggers that would signal the right time for the deep sleepers to emerge. Rising global temperatures, increased atmospheric oxygen levels, and a human population large enough to support a breeding population of large predators. All of these conditions had been met in the modern world. As Elena studied the ancient warnings, she realized that humanity was facing a threat that it was completely unprepared for. Modern humans had no knowledge of how to fight prehistoric predators, no memory of the ancient hunting techniques that had once saved their species from extinction. The tablets contained detailed descriptions of the weapons and tactics that had been effective against different types of predators, but the knowledge had been lost to time. Modern military technology might be powerful, but it was designed for fighting human enemies, not creatures that had evolved specifically to hunt humans. That night, Elena made a decision that would change the course of her career and, possibly, the fate of humanity. She couldn't keep this information confined to academic circles. The world needed to know about the threat that might be emerging from the depths of the earth. But, first, she needed to understand exactly what they were dealing with. The tablets contained references to a master archive, a central repository of knowledge about the deep sleepers that the ancient humans had hidden somewhere safe. According to the records, this archive contained everything needed to identify, track, and eliminate the surviving predators. Elena stared out at the Montana Badlands under the starlit sky, knowing that their peaceful archaeological dig was about to become something much more dangerous. They needed to find the master archive before the deep sleepers emerged from their 65 million year slumber. Because according to the ancient warnings, once the predators woke up, humanity would have very little time to remember how to fight for its survival. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the command center that had been hastily constructed at the Montana dig site, surrounded by monitors displaying satellite feeds from around the globe. What had begun as an archaeological expedition had transformed into an international crisis response operation in less than 2 weeks. The evidence was undeniable now. The deep sleepers were awakening. Reports were flooding in from research stations worldwide. The seismic disturbances beneath Antarctica had intensified dramatically, and satellite thermal imaging was detecting massive heat signatures moving deep beneath the ice. The oceanic monitoring stations were recording sounds that no known marine life could produce, low-frequency calls that seemed to be communicating across vast distances. Most disturbing of all, 3 research teams had gone missing in the past week. A geological survey crew in Siberia had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only their equipment and signs of a violent struggle. An oil exploration platform in the North Sea had lost contact after reporting unusual disturbances on the ocean floor. And a climate research station in northern Canada had sent a final panic transmission about something large moving beneath the permafrost before falling silent. Elena studied the ancient tablets that were now spread across multiple tables, their translations becoming more urgent with each passing hour. Dr. Sarah Kim had been working around the clock to decipher the sections dealing with the master archive, and the results were both promising and terrifying. "I've found it," Sarah announced, bursting into the command center with barely contained excitement. The location of the master archive. The ancient humans hid their complete knowledge base in a facility they called the memory chamber. Elena looked up from the satellite feeds. "Where?" Sarah spread out a modern map and overlaid it with her translation of the ancient location markers. "According to the tablets, it's beneath what we now know as Easter Island." The ancient humans chose the location specifically because it was isolated and geologically stable. Dr. Morrison, who had been coordinating with government officials, turned from his bank of communication equipment. Easter Island? That's going to be a problem. The Chilean government has locked down the entire area since we briefed them on the situation. They're treating it as a potential biological hazard zone. Elena studied the map more carefully. Easter Island had always been a mystery, with its massive stone statues standing guard over secrets that archaeology had never been able to fully explain. Now it appeared that those statues might have been marking something far more important than anyone had realized. The tablets suggest that the memory chamber contains everything the ancient humans learned about fighting the predators, Sarah continued. Detailed biological information, effective weapons designs, hunting strategies that were proven successful against specific species. Marcus Chen looked up from a computer terminal where he had been analyzing the recent seismic data. We might not have much time to retrieve that information. The seismic patterns are accelerating. Whatever's down there, it's becoming more active by the hour. Elena made a decision that she knew would change her life forever. We're going to Easter Island. Sarah, I need you to translate everything you can about accessing the memory chamber. Marcus, gather all the portable equipment we'll need for underground exploration. Morrison, contact whoever you need to contact to get us clearance. Morrison shook his head. Elena, you don't understand. The Chilean military has quarantined the island. They're not letting anyone in or out. And, even if they did, we're talking about an unauthorized archaeological excavation in a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Then, we'll have to convince them that the alternative is much worse, Elena replied, pointing to the satellite feed showing thermal anomalies spreading across the globe. Because if we don't get that information soon, we're going to be fighting a war with weapons and tactics that are 65 million years out of date. The next 48 hours were a blur of frantic activity. Elena used every contact she had in the international scientific community to build support for the Easter Island expedition. The mounting evidence of awakening predators made her case increasingly compelling, and, one by one, government officials began to take the threat seriously. Dr. Foster's marine biology team provided crucial support by sharing their deep ocean monitoring data. The sounds they were detecting from the ocean trenches were definitely biological in origin, and the patterns suggested complex communication between multiple large organisms. More alarming still, the sounds were getting louder and more frequent. The breakthrough came when a Japanese research vessel in the Pacific detected something rising from the deepest parts of the ocean. Their sonar readings showed objects larger than blue whales moving upward through the water column at impossible speeds. By the time the objects reached the surface, the research vessel had lost contact. Satellite imagery later showed debris from the vessel scattered across a wide area of ocean, with massive disturbances in the water that suggested something had attacked the ship from below. Elena received authorization for the Easter Island expedition 3 hours after the Japanese research vessel disappeared. The flight to Easter Island took 18 hours, with stops in Los Angeles and Tahiti to pick up additional equipment and personnel. Elena's team was now joined by military advisors, deep excavation specialists, and representatives from multiple government agencies. What had started as a small archaeological expedition had become an international emergency response. As their plane descended toward Easter Island's small airport, Elena got her first look at the massive stone statues that had made the island famous. The Moai stood in silent rows across the landscape, their weathered faces turned toward the ocean as if they were standing guard against something approaching from the sea. According to Sarah's translations, those statues weren't just artistic monuments. They were markers, positioned to guide ancient humans to the hidden entrances of the memory chamber. The island itself had been transformed since the Chilean military had taken control. Temporary structures housed monitoring equipment that tracked seismic activity, thermal sensors, and communication arrays that connected the remote island to command centers around the world. Armed patrols moved constantly around the perimeter, watching for threats that might emerge from either the sea or the land. Elena was met at the airport by Colonel Martinez, a career military officer who had been briefed on the situation but clearly remained skeptical about the scale of the threat. Dr. Vasquez, Martinez said as they shook hands. I've read your reports, and I'll admit that the evidence is concerning. But, I need you to understand that this island is now under military control. Any excavation activities will need to be coordinated with my security teams. Elena nodded, understanding the Colonel's position. We appreciate the protection, Colonel. But, time is critical. Every hour we delay gives these creatures more opportunity to fully emerge from hibernation. Martinez led them to a briefing room where maps and tactical displays showed the current situation around the island. We've detected unusual activity on the ocean floor approximately 50 kilometers from the island. Sonar readings suggest large objects moving in coordinated patterns. My naval support is maintaining a safe distance, but we're prepared to engage if anything approaches the island. Sarah spread out her translations and pointed to specific passages. According to the ancient records, the memory chamber was designed to be accessed only when the deep sleepers were beginning to emerge. The ancient humans knew that someday, their descendants would need this information. Elena studied the translated instructions for accessing the chamber. The process was complex, requiring specific actions to be taken at multiple Moai sites across the island. The ancient humans had designed their security system to ensure that only people who truly understood the threat would be able to access their archived knowledge. The first step requires us to activate markers at 7 different statue sites, Sarah explained. Each site contains hidden mechanisms that were designed to remain functional for millions of years. Marcus had been setting up geological survey equipment to map the underground structures beneath the island. I'm detecting massive hollow spaces beneath the central part of the island. The chambers extend much deeper than natural cave systems could reach. This was definitely artificial construction on an enormous scale. The team spent the rest of the day preparing for the excavation while monitoring reports from around the world. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Research stations in remote areas were reporting sightings of large creatures moving through previously unexplored regions. Most of the sightings were brief and unclear, but they all described predators that matched the ancient descriptions. That evening, Elena stood among the Moai statues as the sun set over the Pacific Ocean. The massive stone faces seemed to be watching the horizon, waiting for something that had been delayed for 65 million years but was finally approaching. The ancient humans who carved these statues knew this day would come, Sarah said, joining Elena among the monuments. According to the tablets, they spent generations preparing for the possibility that the deep sleepers would eventually return. Elena touched one of the weathered stone faces, marveling at the dedication of people who had worked to protect descendants they would never meet. They left us everything we need to fight back. The question is whether we're smart enough to use their knowledge effectively. The next morning, the team began the process of activating the hidden mechanisms at each Moai site. The ancient instructions were precise but cryptic, requiring specific sequences of actions that had been designed to remain secret for millions of years. At the first site, Sarah's translations indicated that they needed to locate a hidden cavity behind one of the massive statues. Marcus used ground-penetrating radar to identify the exact location, and the excavation team carefully removed layers of accumulated soil and rock. Hidden behind the statue, they found a chamber containing crystalline formations that appeared to be artificial. When exposed to direct sunlight, the crystals began to emit a low humming sound and produce patterns of colored light. It's some kind of technological system, Marcus observed, studying the crystals with scientific instruments. But the technology is unlike anything I've ever seen. These crystals appear to be storing and processing information using principles we don't understand. As they activated the mechanism at each site, Elena noticed that the crystals were communicating with each other, sending pulses of light across the island in complex patterns. The ancient humans had built a network of information storage and retrieval systems that had remained dormant for 65 million years, waiting for the right conditions to reactivate. After 6 hours of careful work, they had successfully activated mechanisms at all 7 required sites. The final step, according to the ancient instructions, was to approach the main entrance of the memory chamber, which was hidden beneath the largest cluster of Moai statues at the center of the island. As the team gathered at the central site, Elena felt the ground beneath her feet beginning to vibrate. The crystalline network they had activated was responding to their presence, and, somewhere deep beneath the island, ancient mechanisms were coming to life. A section of ground between the statues began to sink, revealing a perfectly circular shaft that descended into darkness. The walls of the shaft were lined with the same crystalline technology they had found at the other sites, providing a soft blue illumination that allowed them to see the way down. Elena looked at her team, knowing that they were about to descend into a repository of knowledge that could determine the fate of human civilization. Somewhere beneath their feet lay the accumulated wisdom of humanity's first great war, carefully preserved by ancestors who had fought and died to give their descendants a chance to survive. As alarms began sounding from the monitoring stations around the island, Elena realized that they were running out of time. The deep sleepers were no longer sleeping. Around the world, the ancient predators were emerging from their hiding places, hungry after millions of years of hibernation and ready to reclaim their dominance over the earth. The war that had ended 65 million years ago was about to begin again. The memory chamber was unlike anything Elena had ever imagined. The circular shaft descended nearly 200 feet through solid rock before opening into a vast underground complex that stretched beyond the range of their lights. The walls were covered with the same crystalline technology they had found above, but here the crystals formed intricate patterns that seemed to pulse with stored information. Elena's team moved carefully through corridors that had been carved with mathematical precision millions of years before humans were supposed to have possessed such capabilities. Emergency reports were streaming through their communication equipment, painting a picture of chaos erupting across the globe. In Siberia, the permafrost was cracking open along fault lines that stretched for hundreds of miles, releasing creatures that witnesses described as living nightmares. The Chilean Navy had lost 2 warships to something that had emerged from the deep ocean trenches off the coast of South America. Research stations in Antarctica were reporting massive shapes moving beneath the ice, heading toward populated areas. Dr. Sarah Kim worked frantically to translate the crystalline information storage systems while Marcus Chen mapped the chamber's layout and Elena coordinated with the surface teams. The ancient humans had built more than just an archive, they had created a complete command center for fighting the prehistoric predators. The main information core is deeper in the complex, Sarah announced, studying the patterns of light moving through the crystal networks. But, Elena, the system is trying to communicate with us. It's responding to our presence and activating dormant protocols. As if to confirm her words, the crystalline walls around them suddenly blazed with brilliant light, and images began forming in the air above their heads. 3-dimensional projections showed scenes of ancient battles, depicting humans armed with sophisticated weapons fighting against creatures that matched the fossils they had discovered in Montana. Elena watched in amazement as the holographic displays showed battle tactics that seemed impossibly advanced for prehistoric humans. Coordinated groups using energy weapons that fired concentrated beams of light, protective armor that seemed to be made from crystalline materials, and vehicles that moved without any visible means of propulsion. This isn't just Stone Age technology, Marcus observed, studying the projections. These ancient humans had access to energy sources and material science that we're only beginning to understand today. The images showed the progression of the ancient war, from early encounters where humans were clearly outmatched by the giant predators, to later battles where increasingly sophisticated human technology turned the tide. But, the final images were the most disturbing, showing the deliberate extermination campaigns that had driven most of the predator species to extinction. Sarah had made contact with the chamber's central information system, and data was flowing through the crystalline network faster than any of them could process. Detailed biological analyses of every predator species, tactical assessments of their strengths and weaknesses, and weapon specifications that could be used to fight them effectively. Elena, you need to see this, Sarah called urgently. The system is showing us real-time data. It's tracking the creatures that are emerging right now. Elena hurried to where Sarah was standing in front of a wall-sized crystal display. The projection showed a 3-dimensional map of the Earth with red markers indicating predator emergence sites around the globe. As they watched, new markers appeared in real time as reports came in from monitoring stations. The pattern was terrifying in its coordination. The predators weren't emerging randomly, they were following a strategic plan that had been developed over millions of years of hibernation. Coastal areas were being attacked first, cutting off escape routes and isolating human populations. Remote research stations were being eliminated systematically, preventing early warning systems from functioning effectively. It's like they're following a military campaign, Elena realized. They've been planning this emergence for 65 million years. Marcus pointed to several markers that were converging on major population centers. According to this display, the main assault hasn't even begun yet. They're still positioning themselves for coordinated attacks on cities. The chamber's information system seemed to understand their urgency. New projections appeared showing weapon designs that could be constructed using modern technology and materials. Energy weapons based on crystalline amplification systems, armor materials that could withstand the claws and teeth of prehistoric predators, and detection systems that could track the creature's movements. But the most important information was tactical. The ancient humans had learned through bitter experience that fighting the predators required more than just superior weapons. These creatures were intelligent, adaptive, and capable of learning from each encounter with human defenders. They're showing us the predators' behavioral patterns, Sarah translated as new data flowed through the systems. Each species has specific hunting strategies and territorial behaviors. If we understand those patterns, we can predict their movements and set effective traps. Elena studied the tactical information with growing hope. The ancient humans had faced impossible odds and won through intelligence, preparation, and sacrifice. Their descendants could do the same if they acted quickly enough. The communication equipment crackled with an urgent transmission from Colonel Martinez on the surface. Dr. Vasquez, we've got multiple contacts approaching the island from the ocean. Sonar readings suggest objects larger than anything in our databases. They're moving fast and heading directly for us. Elena looked at her team, knowing that their time in the memory chamber was about to be cut short. But they had what they needed, the ancient knowledge that could turn the tide in humanity's favor. Sarah, can you download the tactical information to our portable systems? I'm already working on it, Sarah replied, connecting their equipment to the crystalline networks. The chamber seems designed to transfer its information quickly in emergency situations. The ancient humans knew that their descendants might not have much time to study the archives. As data flowed into their systems, Elena realized that the memory chamber represented more than just preserved knowledge. It was a gift from humanity's past to its future, carefully maintained across an impossible span of time by people who had sacrificed everything to ensure their species' survival. The ground above them shook as something massive impacted the island's surface. Emergency alarms echoed through the chamber as the crystalline lights flickered and stabilized. We need to get back to the surface, Elena announced. Colonel Martinez is going to need this information if he's going to defend the island. The team gathered their equipment and began the rapid ascent to the surface, carrying with them the accumulated wisdom of humanity's first great war. As they climbed, Elena couldn't help but think about the ancient humans who had built the memory chamber. They had fought against impossible odds and won, but their victory had required terrible sacrifices. Now it was her generation's turn to make those same choices. They emerged from the chamber to find chaos on the surface. Colonel Martinez was coordinating defensive positions around the island while his naval support engaged something in the waters offshore. The sound of weapons fire echoed across the Pacific as modern military technology met prehistoric predators for the first time in 65 million years. Report! Elena called as she reached the command post. Martinez looked grim. We've got 3 large hostiles in the water. Our torpedoes aren't having any effect, their hide is too thick, or they're using some kind of natural armor. They're testing our defenses, probably trying to determine our capabilities before mounting a full assault. Elena quickly connected their downloaded data to the command center's systems. The ancient tactical information began displaying on the military computers, showing detailed analyses of the creatures that were approaching the island. According to this data, the oceanic variants use echolocation to hunt, Elena explained, studying the information. Their natural armor is effective against kinetic weapons, but they're vulnerable to specific types of energy attacks. Sarah pointed to weapon specifications that were appearing on the screens. The ancient humans used crystalline amplification technology to create energy weapons. We might be able to adapt their designs using modern laser systems. Marcus was already working with the military technicians to modify their equipment based on the ancient specifications. If we can modulate our laser targeting systems to match these frequency patterns, we should be able to penetrate their armor. The next few hours were a desperate race against time as Elena's team worked with the military forces to implement ancient technology using modern equipment. The predators in the water seemed content to wait, as if they understood that more of their kind were still emerging around the world. Reports continued to stream in from global monitoring stations. Major cities were reporting sightings of massive creatures moving through their outskirts. Military forces were engaging the predators with limited success, discovering that conventional weapons were largely ineffective against creatures that had evolved specifically to survive human attacks. But the tide began to turn as Elena's team shared the memory chamber's information with military commanders around the world. Ancient tactical knowledge was being rapidly adapted to modern warfare, giving human defenders the tools they needed to fight back effectively. The first successful engagement came from a military base in Alaska, where modified energy weapons successfully drove off a pack of creatures that had been terrorizing remote settlements. Similar successes followed in other locations as human forces learned to apply 65-million-year-old battle tactics to contemporary conflicts. The predators responded by changing their own tactics, confirming the ancient warnings about their adaptive intelligence. But the memory chamber's archives contained detailed information about those adaptive behaviors, allowing human commanders to stay one step ahead of their prehistoric enemies. As night fell over Easter Island, Elena stood among the Moai statues once again, watching as her team's modified energy weapons successfully drove off the oceanic predators that had been threatening the island. The ancient stone guardians seemed to approve, their weathered faces turned toward an ocean that was no longer quite as threatening as it had been that morning. Colonel Martinez joined her among the monuments, his expression showing a mixture of exhaustion and amazement. "I have to admit, Dr. Vasquez, when I first read your reports I thought you were describing something out of a science fiction movie. I never imagined that we'd actually be fighting prehistoric monsters with weapons based on technology that's older than the dinosaurs." Elena nodded, thinking about the ancient humans who had stood in similar places, fighting similar battles across an unimaginable span of time. The creatures we're fighting now are the survivors, Colonel. They're the ones that were smart enough and adaptable enough to avoid extinction the first time around. This war isn't going to be easy. But we can win it, Martinez said, watching as reports of successful engagements continued to arrive from around the world. Thanks to the knowledge you've recovered, we're not going into this fight blind. Elena looked up at the stars appearing in the Pacific sky, thinking about the generations of ancient humans who had sacrificed everything to ensure that their descendants would have the tools needed to survive. The war against the prehistoric predators was far from over, but humanity was no longer defenseless. The deep sleepers had awakened to find a world that remembered how to fight them. And, this time, the humans were going to finish what their ancestors had started 65 million years ago. In research facilities around the world, scientists were already working to mass-produce the weapons and technologies that the memory chamber had revealed. Military commanders were studying ancient tactical manuals and adapting them to modern battlefield conditions. And, in remote corners of the Earth where the predators had been hiding, human teams were preparing to take the fight to their ancient enemies. Elena smiled as she watched the lights of human civilization continuing to burn across the globe, defended now by the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who had refused to surrender in the face of extinction. The greatest war in human history was just beginning, but, for the first time in 65 million years, the outcome was no longer in doubt. Humanity had remembered how to be apex predators, and the deep sleepers were about to discover that their long hibernation had not been enough to escape the persistence of human determination.